The topic is Dr. Martin Luther King at the 21st Century, and the guest is Dr. Baldwin from Vanderbilt University and one of the preeminent Martin Luther King scholars of our period. And of course, Dr. Baldwin, let's continue our conversation dealing with Martin Luther King. I think you were talking about King's attitude toward poverty and et cetera.
Yes. And if I had to add something to that, I would say that King consistently called for a redistribution of wealth, for a kind of restructuring of the capitalistic system so that the have-nots can grow in terms of material goods, and I think that's still important today. I think we need to look at the wealthy, we need to look at the people who are very poor, and we need to ask ourselves, why should some people be very, very rich and others be very, very poor? And I think we have to look at capitalism in a very critical way, is what Dr. King was about. Now, regarding the issue of creating a culture of life and a culture of peace, the issue of war, Dr. King always told us that you can't create that kind of culture with the military or with violence. And it seems to me that too many in our society today are talking about a culture of peace and a culture of life, but they are very open to the use of military means. And another thing about this, let me push it further and say that when Dr. King was talking about this culture, he was not simply talking about the United States. He was talking about a global, on a global level, creating a culture of life and peace from which all people of the world can benefit.
Very good.
And he had that in mind.
Very good. You know, and of course, Dr. King had quite a number of things to say about many things, but now you also mentioned scholarship. And let me sort of raise this question in terms of the scholarship. Has much changed in reference to certain aspects of Dr. King, the assassination, for example, and some of the other things that are traditional in terms of our thought patterns in reference to Dr. King?
That's an excellent question. There are several schools of thought. I mean, I should say, you have those who deal with Dr. King's assassination, who are now subscribing to what is called a conspiracy theory. And that's pretty much accepted now in scholarly circles, that his death resulted from a conspiracy that involved many forces in our society.
So James Earl Ray didn't just go out and shoot him by himself.
Exactly. I mean, that single assassin theory is pretty much rejected now by most scholars. But the scholarship, I find most impressive the fact that the scholarship now is beginning to deal with Dr. King as a thinker, as an intellectual. Up until the 1980s, most of the scholarship treated him as an activist, as one who led demonstrations in the street, as one who employed nonviolent tactics such as boycotts and street demonstrations and civil disobedience, etc. But in the last 2 decades, scholars have become more interested in Dr. King as an intellectual. What kind of ideals did he set forth? Ideals that might be useful for us today as we try to address problems of race, problems of economics, problems of violence and human destruction. So the scholarship is moving in that direction. I think scholars are also beginning to see Dr. King as a world figure. And I think that's important because for too long we limited him to the American context.
Almost to the South.
That's right, and seeing him as a Southern black leader, as an American Gandhi. But now scholars are looking at his impact on liberation movements around the world, in South Africa, Vietnam, India, Africa, and how he has influenced liberation movements worldwide, how he has inspired people. I don't think it's an accident that in over 100 countries today, Dr. King's birthday is recognized or celebrated. And that's really puts him in a very unique place in history, because even presidents of the United States don't have that kind of recognition. And so Dr. King, I think, is being appreciated finally for what he tried to give us a half-century ago, for what he tried to achieve in terms of not just a national beloved community, but an international beloved community.
And so King still, whole career will still have a tremendous impact upon whatever we do having to do with human relations.
Exactly. There's no question about it. We hear the song "We Shall Overcome" all the time. Women who are interested in women liberation sing that song. the anti-war protest in Crawford, Texas recently. The song "We Shall Overcome" was heard. So I think it says something about Dr. King's legacy and how that legacy continues to live in movements for justice, in peace movements, in movements against poverty. Also, Dr. King, I think we have to keep this in mind, was very much concerned about health care issues.
Very good.
Because he moved from this idea of this dignity and worth, the sacredness of all life. All life is sacred. So he was concerned about health care, and that's a major problem in the 21st century. Millions of people don't have health care. And Dr. King was very much concerned about that. He was concerned about the handicapped. He was concerned about children's rights. All of these issues
Speak to
that
young
we
people,
consider.
Dr. King, and young people. I mean, children, young people. I mean, what's with that?
Unfortunately, scholars have not addressed that yet, but I've been going through some of his papers at the King Center, and I've gone to Boston University a number of times, and the letters he wrote to children are very impressive because he always challenged them not only to study, but to think ahead. To think in terms of what they wanted to become, to think in terms of the kinds of contributions they could make, not just to the uplift of themselves, but to the uplift of humanity. Now, interestingly enough, about 10, 15 years ago, the King Center did publish a major manual on how to teach Dr. King's principles to children. But unfortunately, schools have not noticed, have not taken note of that particular document. It's a very, very important document that gives guidelines for teaching children nonviolent principles from kindergarten up to grade 12.
So there's already a plan that has already been laid out by Dr. King in terms of how that can be done.
It's not being used, and I think given the levels of violence in our society and in our world, we're going to have to start looking at documents like this and looking at Dr. King's life and his teachings and to sort of determine the meaningfulness of those teachings for us today, because there's a certain timelessness about the concerns that Dr. King raised with respect to violence and human destruction.
You know, that's why we always return to that 1997 interview, that no matter when you listen to that, you can listen to it in 2005.
Yeah,
It still seems as if it was done yesterday, primarily because of that timelessness that you're talking about.
Exactly.
And of course, Dr. Ball, we're going to have to take our second commercial break, and after which we'll come back and give you an opportunity to close us out for today. And we'll see our audience following this very, very short commercial break. The topic is Dr.